did it again. Sophie Cunningham absolutely embarrassed the Indiana Fever coaches, especially Briann January, who's supposed to be the defensive guru. I mean, Stephanie White came here from Connecticut. They told me she was a defensive coach when she got here. But
we are not going to win very many games when people score 100 points on us, and they average, I think, around 80 points, and we let them score like 111. Our defense.
Sophie Cunningham just did something most NBA players would never dare do. She walked into a podcast, sat down with a microphone in front of her, and essentially called out her own coaching staff on national record. Not in the locker room, not to teammates behind closed doors, on a podcast. She knew every word would get clipped, shared, analyzed, and weaponized across social media. And she did it anyway. That's not venting, that's a message. That's a player saying the house is on fire and making sure everyone from the front office to the fan base hears the alarm. The Indiana Fever are in the middle of a defensive collapse that has nobody talking about chemistry problems or growing pains anymore. They're talking about whether the coaching staff has already lost the room. A starting player is publicly dismantling the game plan on camera. Teammates are waving off the assistant coach on the bench during games. The head coach is standing at the podium saying things like, "It is where it is," and no clear-cut expectation, while the team hemorrhages points and opportunity. And buried underneath all of this is the Caitlin Clark injury situation, where the organization keeps answering questions about their franchise player with fog and department lists instead of actual information. This isn't just a losing streak, this is dysfunction, and it's being broadcast in real time to everyone watching the most
Horrible, and I think everyone knows that.
okay, now, who's responsible for the defense? Who's responsible for the defense, you guys? That would be one where he has had an atrocious defensive game plan from early on in the season to now. She started out switching everything 1 through 5. The defense was embarrassing. You were getting Caitlin Clark switched on to any and everybody.
Scrutinized basketball team in the sport right now. Let's start with the exact moment everything changed. Sophie Cunningham sat down and said something that should have stayed in the locker room. The Fever are giving up 111 points. The league average is around 80. That's not a bad quarter. That's a scoreboard that tells you nobody on the court knows where they're supposed to be. And she pointed straight at the person responsible for the defense. Now most players won't do that. They'll complain privately. They'll vent to teammates. They'll text the group chat. But they won't put it on a podcast knowing it's going to get sliced into clips and sent to every sports Twitter account in existence. When a player makes that choice, they're not blowing off steam. They're making a statement that's meant to reach the front office, the coaching staff, and every fan watching at home. Here's what makes it even more damning. She didn't speak in generalities. She got specific about the defensive scheme itself. She talked about switching 1 through 5, which is basketball language for saying every time the opposing team runs a screen, your defenders just trade assignments. The guard takes whoever comes, the big takes whoever comes, nobody fights over the pick. On paper, it sounds modern and efficient. In reality, it only works if all 5 players on the court can guard multiple positions and communicate every single second. And that's where this falls apart for the Fever. When you're switching everyone onto everyone, you're hunting for mismatches. You're deliberately trying to create situations where a smaller, weaker defender gets stuck on a bigger, stronger player. And if your defensive coordinator keeps switching your franchise player, Caitlin Clark, onto guards, wings, and post players she can't physically match up with, then you're not seeing a player fail the plan. You're watching a plan fail the players. Sophie didn't just say the defense is bad. She explained the structural reason why it's bad. She pointed at the person who designed the structure. And she did it knowing that every opposing coach in the league watches those clips, every NBA scout that covers women's basketball sees it, and every fan that cares about the Fever's future hears it as something beyond criticism. It sounds like a warning. It sounds like someone saying this is broken and everyone needs to know. But the podcast clip isn't even the wildest part of this story. There's footage from an actual game that tells you everything you need to know about where the relationship between players and coaching staff actually stands. And it doesn't require translation.
Between Sophie Cunningham, Caitlin Clark, and Briann January, this already lets you know they not really trying to be hearing from Briann January. They ain't like they're to the point of telling her to what? Let's get into this. You got Briann January. This is Briann January. You see her coming down right here, trying to calm Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham down on the bench. They're just disregarding her. Like, get out of here. Look, you see Sophie say, "Get out of my way. Get out of my face. Just get out of my face."
It's just body language, pure, unfiltered body language that you can't fake under pressure. The footage shows Briann January, the assistant coach responsible for the defense, coming down the sideline during a heated moment in the middle of a game. Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham are clearly frustrated, clearly locked in an intense conversation on the bench. The assistant coach approaches them, presumably to settle them down, to offer guidance, to do what a defensive coordinator is supposed to do in that moment. And they just wave her off. Watch the footage again and look at what actually happens. The players literally gesture for her to get away. They're not listening. They're not interested in what she has to say. They're essentially telling her to leave them alone and let them be. It's not aggressive in an obvious way, but it's dismissive. It's the kind of body language that says, "We're done hearing from you." Now, there's always context needed here. Benches get tense during games. Players snap at coaches, at each other, at themselves when they're losing. One moment in the middle of a bad stretch doesn't tell the whole story. You could watch that clip in isolation and say it's just frustrated players frustrated during a rough night. But you have to pair it with what came right before it. You have to remember that a teammate just went on a podcast and called the defensive game plan trash. You have to remember that this isn't one frustrated player having one bad night. This is a pattern. This is a locker room that has quietly, collectively decided that the voice in charge of the defense isn't worth listening to anymore. And once that decision gets made inside a team, once players stop taking the coach seriously, it's incredibly hard to walk back. Because it's not a disagreement.
Being able to really work, fine-tuning some details, and being able to add some things.
Slippage specifically, what do you view as those areas?
Well, there's always slippage. I mean, certainly. I think execution defensively, I think execution offensively. Really, when it comes to details, you need reps. And so
this lady says a bunch of nothing. Oh, what the details? How about a better game plan from you and Briann January? Aren't y'all supposed to be defensive gurus? Aren't y'all supposed to be defensive gurus, Stephanie White? What is the big holdup on y'all getting the defense together? I don't understand. I'm having an
agreement about strategy anymore. It's a breakdown in respect. And you can't coach a team that doesn't respect you. You can talk at them. You can draw up plays. You can stand on the sideline and yell, but you can't actually coach them. And that's the difference between a team that's struggling and a team that's fractured. So Stephanie White, the head coach, steps up to address all of this. She's got to explain the defense. She's got to respond to a starting player publicly criticizing the game plan. She's got to answer for why her team is giving up 111 points when the league average is 80. This is the moment where a head coach can either take responsibility and outline a clear path forward, or she can disappear into corporate speak. Watch what she actually does. She starts talking about slippage, execution, details, reps. She talks about how this roster is heavily rebuilt with lots of new pieces and that chemistry and defensive habits take time to develop. She talks about needing the opportunity to get reps and fine-tune things. It all sounds reasonable on the surface. It all sounds like a coach who understands her team is young and needs patience. But stop and actually measure what she's saying against what she's not saying. A player told the world the defensive game plan is broken. The response is that there's slippage in execution. That's not an answer, that's a deflection. That's saying the problem isn't the plan, the problem is that players aren't running it right. But that contradicts what Sophie said. She said the plan itself is putting players in impossible positions. Now compare this to how a different kind of head coach answers the same question. Picture Cheryl Reeve in Minnesota, who has built one of the sustained dynasties in women's basketball. Picture asking her why her defense is struggling. She would tell you exactly what the issue is. She would tell you what standard she expects. She would tell you the timeline for fixing it. She would own it. Or Sandy
Defensively, are they a little bit behind maybe where you expected? How would you gauge that side?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was a clear-cut expectation with so many new people. You know, certainly when you add new pieces different from what you had, and new pieces that, you know, some of them new to the league.
Wait a minute. Expectation for her team, defensively, offensively. I bet she had expectation. I'm sure Sandy Brondillo has expectation. I'm sure all of the good coaches in any league have expectation. I'm sure they have expectation. No expectation.
Brondillo, who just steered New York to a championship. Ask her why her defense gave up a bad night and she tells you. She doesn't hide behind department meetings and vague promises about reps. The difference is urgency. Real coaches sound urgent when something is broken. They sound like they're going to fix it. Stephanie White sounds like she's accepting the situation and hoping that time will solve it. She sounds like she's managing the message instead of managing the problem. And that gap between what players are saying needs to change and what coaches are saying will happen, that gap is where trust dies. Players notice when the person in charge doesn't sound like they're in control. Then comes the line that should stop any Fever fan dead in their tracks. When asked whether the team was expected to be behind defensively, Stephanie White says there wasn't really a clear-cut expectation because there were so many new people. Read that again, no clear-cut expectation. Think about what you're actually saying as a head coach when those words come out of your mouth. You're telling the entire organization, the front office, the players, the fan base, that you walked into this season without defining what good defense is supposed to look like. You didn't set a standard. You didn't establish a bar. You just showed up and figured you'd see how things went. That's not humility. That's not being relatable. That's an admission that contradicts the entire reason this coaching staff was hired in the first place. The Fever brought in Stephanie White specifically because she came with a defensive pedigree. The sales pitch to fans was that they hired proven defensive minds. They spent money on coaches who make teams tougher, who hold opponents below their average, who specialize in the exact thing this team is currently failing at. That's the whole promise. That's the entire credibility structure. Now the head coach is saying there was no clear-cut expectation. Compare that to any serious operation in any industry. A sales team doesn't walk in and
Figure it out on the go. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous.
I think that you gauge it early. You think about what you want to do and what you want to put in. You gauge how quickly we're able to get to that point, and then how much retention there is. And so, I think it's a group that would I like to be further along. Of course, I think every coach would. It is where we are. And I think now for us having an opportunity for a week to be able to get back to addressing some of those things and then seeing.
Get into this.
I don't feel like legitimate WNBA fans. Caitlin did an individual workout this morning.
What does that entail for her? Is she with coaches for that? Is she just literally by herself?
No, she's with our player development coaches, with our medical staff, with our sports performance staff, and just working on some basketball skill stuff, movement pattern stuff as she continues to work her way.
say we'll see how many deals we close. A restaurant doesn't open without standards for food quality. A film production doesn't start without knowing what the finished product should look like. Every legitimate organization sets a bar before the work starts. You decide what good looks like, then you chase it. The coaching staff at Minnesota has an expectation. The coaching staff at New York has an expectation. Every championship caliber team in basketball has defensive standards set before October even arrives. Standards that are non-negotiable. Standards that every player knows and respects. The Fever's head coach is saying that didn't happen here, and fans can smell that immediately. It doesn't sound like confidence. It doesn't sound like a plan. It sounds like a coach who either didn't know what she was walking into or worse, didn't care enough to establish one before the season started. Either way, it's a line that gets printed on every scoreboard of doubt the fan base already has building up. Then the follow-up comes, would she like to be further along than this? Of course, but it is where it is. Sit in that phrase because it's absolutely crucial to understanding what's happening here. It is where it is the language of acceptance. It's the language of inevitability. It's what you say about traffic or the weather, things completely outside your control. You can't change traffic, you can't control the weather, so you accept it. It is what it is. But a defensive game plan isn't traffic. A roster construction isn't the weather. These are things a head coach...
Better with or back, or do you have more clarity, I guess, just on the injury itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think every day is a little bit better, right? Every day is a little bit better. And again, I reiterate for those who haven't had back issues, every day can be something different. You can feel really good in practices or workouts or warm-ups or whatever, and then you go to bed at night and you wake up and it's different. Or, if you sit at home and you're watching something on television, if you're watching the game or whatever else, you can wake up and it's different. I mean, it's the back is a nagging thing.
Directly controls. These are choices made by the person standing at the podium. And when that person tells you the result is just where things ended up, they're essentially saying they're not in control of it. Meanwhile, the players in that locker room sound completely different. Sophie Cunningham sounds alarmed. The body language on the bench looks like players who have lost faith. The team is giving up 111 points. The franchise is bleeding money and opportunity. Everyone with a jersey on sounds like the house is on fire. But the person with the clipboard sounds calm. She sounds patient. She sounds like she's already made peace with how things are, and that mismatch between the urgency of the players and the acceptance of the coaching staff, that's the actual story. That's what tells you something is genuinely broken. Now there's a human side to this that's worth acknowledging. Stephanie White is standing at a podium after a rough stretch. She's tired. She's trying not to throw her assistant coach under the bus in public, even though—
Is that how you would, or the medical staff would describe it as a re-aggravation, or is this kind of a new thing?
Yeah, I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's a re-aggravation. Again, when you have a back, it's like every day.
Clark got to get away from Stephanie White. She has to get away from her. Lady got no info, oh, she just did, just another individual workout and da-da-da. Like, listen, man, I hope y'all don't think y'all about to do this whole same thing y'all did last season. We need to know if she playing or not. People need to know if she playing or not. Y'all need to stop playing games with the day-to-day stuff. Start giving people real updates and real information, man, because it's getting ridiculous. Get down in the comments. Let me know what y'all think.
Though a starting player just did exactly that on a podcast. There's a whole school of media training that says stay calm, say as little as possible, don't create new problems. But calm and empty are not the same thing. You can be calm and still sound urgent. You can be professional and still communicate that you understand what's actually wrong. You can refuse to throw people under the bus and still own the problem. What you can't do is sound like you've already accepted losing and expect players to fight like they're trying to win. Because the moment players sense that the coaching staff isn't as alarmed as they are, that's when the locker room starts deciding for itself. That's when they stop listening to the person in charge. And once that happens, once players decide the coach isn't in control, no amount of defensive scheme adjustments or rep opportunities is going to fix it. But this organization's problem with transparency doesn't stop at the defensive scheme. It extends straight into the biggest question facing this franchise, the health and status of Caitlin Clark, the one player literally every person tuning in wants to see. Listen to how the updates get delivered. She did an individual workout. She's working with the player development staff, the medical staff, the performance staff, working on skill stuff and movement patterns as she works her way back to full team activity. On the surface, that sounds thorough. Lots of departments, lots of boxes checked. Sounds like she's being taken care of. But stop and ask yourself what you actually learned from all of those words. Did you learn if she's close to returning? No. Did you learn if she's weeks away? No. Did you learn if she's cleared for contact? No. Did you learn anything concrete about her timeline or her condition? No. You got a list of titles and departments and a whole lot of soft language wrapped around a player who is, without exaggeration, the most important individual in this sport's current boom. She's the reason people are tuning in. She's the reason arenas are selling out on the road. She's the financial engine for the entire franchise, and the updates about her are fog. The longer the list of departments involved, the more it starts to feel like the length is the point. Like the organization is hopping that if they say enough names and titles, it will sound like an answer even when it's the opposite. Say player development, medical staff, performance staff, skill development, movement patterns, throw enough jargon at it, and maybe nobody notices that you didn't actually say anything. When the follow-up comes about whether she's improving, the answer gets even more mysterious. Every day is a little bit better. And yeah, there's a legitimate medical reality here. Backs are unpredictable. Backs can feel good at a workout and feel different after you sleep on it. Backs can change throughout the day based on how you sit or move or rest. No honest medical professional hands you a firm return date on a nagging back issue. But there's a massive difference between we don't have a firm date and we're going to tell you nothing until we have one. Fans can handle hard news. What grinds them down is daily fog. It's the sense that the organization would rather manage the message than just level with people about where things actually stand. And when it's the single most valuable player in the sport, that fog doesn't just frustrate the fan base. It ripples out to every broadcast, every opposing arena, every schedule the league is trying to plan around her. It creates uncertainty across the entire sport, and it adds another layer to the story that's already forming about this organization. So step back and look at what's actually happening here. On one side, you've got a defense that a starting player says has been broken since day one. It's run by an assistant coach whose own teammates are waving her off on the bench during games. It's defended by a head coach who admits there was no clear expectation and lands on it is where it is. On the other side, you've got a superstar with a recurring back problem and an organization that answers every single question about her with a list of departments and a shrug. No timeline, no clarity, no actual information, just fog. They're the same story, they're the same pattern, they're the same organization choosing to protect the message over transparency. And that's what separates this from just being a team that needs time to develop. Every team has rough seasons, every roster goes through growing pains, coaches make adjustments, players learn systems, chemistry improves over time, that's normal, that's part of basketball. But what's not normal is an organization that seems more committed to managing what the public knows than to actually fixing the problems. A defensive coordinator whose own players don't take her seriously. A head coach admitting she set no defensive standard before the season started. Updates about the franchise's most important player that reveal nothing. Bad results you can forgive. Every team can have a bad year. What's harder to forgive is a building that appears more interested in controlling the narrative than in leveling with the people who show up and pay and care. That's the moment trust breaks, not because of losses, but because of what losses look like when the organization in charge doesn't seem to have a plan to fix them and isn't interested in telling you what's actually going on. This is where coaching legitimacy actually dies, not in one moment, but in a pattern of moments that add up and tell players and fans that the people in charge aren't in control. They're just managing. And once that decision gets made, once the locker room decides the coaches are managing rather than leading, it becomes almost impossible to walk back. So here's the question every Fever fan has to answer for themselves. Is this patience or panic? Is this a young, heavily rebuilt roster that genuinely needs time? A team that's integrated a lot of new pieces and legitimately requires reps and chemistry development? A situation where you hold the line, trust the process, and let things develop over a full season and into next year? Or is this a coaching staff that's already lost the room? A situation where a starting player is publicly dismantling the game plan, teammates are waving off their defensive coordinator, the head coach is admitting she set no standard, and the franchise's most important player is getting non-answers about her status. Because those are two completely different stories. One ends with patience paying off. The other ends with an opportunity slipping away while the people in charge sound calm about it. The Fever have the biggest stage women's basketball has ever created. The money, the attention, the road arenas selling out, the national television windows. All of it got supercharged by one rookie, and the front office spent and maneuvered to win around her now, not later. When you take on that kind of spotlight and that kind of investment, patience isn't a virtue you get to claim. It's a luxury you forfeited the moment you decided to chase the moment instead of building for it. Tell me which version of this you believe in the comments, patience or panic.